fall in the small town of Fairgrove, Illinois was Helen Brooks's favorite time of year. The leaves turned golden, the breeze carried the scent of pine, and her backyard garden bloomed with late vegetables. After retiring from the town library, where she'd worked for 40 years, Helen had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. Her days were filled with volunteer shifts at the library and tending to her tomatoes, squash, and asters. But nothing brought her more joy than her grandson, Noah. Noah was 8 years old, a bright third grader with a curious mind and an old soul. He called her Grammy Helen and loved nothing more than sitting on the couch with her, devouring adventure books she'd borrow just for him. His favorite was a tattered copy of Treasure Island. Her son Mark and his wife Alicia had been married for 6 years. Mark worked in logistics for a shipping company just outside town, while Alicia was known for her charm at every PTA and neighborhood event. They lived just 15 minutes away in a modest new development. To outsiders, their family looked perfect, and for a long time, Helen believed it was. Once a month, Noah spent an entire Saturday with Helen. Just the two of them. They would bake banana bread, examine caterpillars in the garden, and Helen would read to him from the same books she'd once read to Mark. Last month, Noah picked up a red maple leaf from the ground and said, "Grammy Helen, when I grow up, I want to travel the world with you." Helen had smiled, her heart full. "Then you better keep reading and keep dreaming, sweetheart." She had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything would shatter. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when the phone rang. Helen stirred awake, confused. The sun had not yet risen. She glanced at the clock, 5:31 a.m. No one called this early unless something was wrong. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the receiver. "Hello? This is Helen Brooks." There was silence for a moment, and then a voice she knew well came through her son Mark. But his voice was cracked, thin, unrecognizable. "Mom," he said, barely above a whisper. Helen sat upright, her heart pounding. "Mark? What's going on?" "It's Noah," Mark said. His voice broke. "There was an accident last night." Helen felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean an accident? Is he okay? What hospital is he in?" "I'll come right now." She could hear Alicia crying in the background. Mark's words came in broken fragments. He was walking home from Jacob's house. He tried to cross Main Street. A car was speeding. "Mark," Helen said, her voice rising in panic, "tell me where he is." Silence. Then, a sentence that didn't feel real. "Mom, Noah didn't make it. He died." Helen's hand slipped from the phone. Her knees gave out and she sank into the living room chair. The world around her tilted, and all sound faded into a dull ringing. Noah. Her Noah. Just yesterday, he'd been alive. She had called to ask about his science project, and Mark said he was working hard on it. This couldn't be happening. "No, that's not possible," she whispered. "Mom, you need to come. The funeral. We're making arrangements." Helen sat there, still holding the phone, her breath shallow. She could still hear Noah's laughter in her ears. Still see his hands gripping a library book, his face lighting up when she made apple pie. Mark's voice faded into static as Helen stared at the floor. Noah was gone, and the world suddenly felt colder than she had ever known. The funeral was held 3 days later. It rained that morning, a slow, cold drizzle that soaked through coats and turned the churchyard to mud. Helen stood in the front row, dressed in black, her hands clenched around a white rose, Noah's favorite flower. The casket was small, too small. She didn't cry during the service. Not when the pastor spoke of God's mysterious plans. Not when Noah's classmates placed drawings beside his casket. Not even when Alicia collapsed into Mark's arms in sobs. Helen just stared, her heart emptied of words. That evening, after the burial, Helen returned home alone. She stepped into her quiet house, didn't even take off her shoes. She walked into the living room and sat down, her black dress still wet with rain, the silence pressed on her ears. Not even the clock dared tick loudly. She glanced at the couch where Noah used to sit, where they'd shared hot cocoa, laughter, and stories about dragons and sea voyages. It was too quiet. As the sky darkened outside, Helen didn't move. She had no appetite, no strength, nothing but a weight in her chest that grew heavier by the hour. Then she heard it. A soft sound, barely audible, like footsteps. Helen sat up. At first, she thought it was the wind. Maybe a neighbor's cat brushing against the porch. But then it came again, a slow, dragging shuffle. Something or someone was outside. Her breath caught. She moved to the front door, heart hammering. She looked through the peephole. There was a shadow, small, childlike, standing just beyond the glow of the porch light. "Who's there?" she called, her voice barely steady. "A pause." Then Grammy Helen. Helen froze. Her heart stopped, then roared back to life in her ears. She knew that voice. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But her legs moved on their own. She unlocked the door with trembling hands, flung it open. Standing there was Noah. His face was streaked with dirt. His shirt was torn. His hands were scratched and covered in soil. One shoe was missing. His lips were pale, but he was breathing. "Grammy," he whispered. "Help me." Helen fell to her knees. She didn't know how, but her grandson, her Noah, was alive. Helen reached out and touched his cheek. It was cold, but real. She could feel the rise and fall of his breath, the dampness of sweat mixed with rain and dirt. This was no dream, no hallucination. She pulled him into her arms. Noah clung to her like he would never let go. Inside, she ran warm water for a bath and helped him undress. His small body was covered in scratches. His fingernails were filled with soil. There were bruises on his arms. But he was alive. He was alive. After the bath, she wrapped him in one of her old flannel shirts and gave him soup. He ate like he hadn't had food in days. His hands trembled, and tears kept rolling down his cheeks. Finally, when his stomach was full and his body was warmer, Helen sat beside him on the couch and asked, gently, "Noah, sweetheart, what happened?" Noah looked down at his hands. "I think they tried to kill me," he whispered. Helen didn't understand. "Who?" "Daddy and Mommy," he said, his voice flat. "They gave me something to drink. It tasted weird. Then I got sleepy. I woke up in the dark, in a box, underground." Helen could hardly breathe. "I think they wanted the insurance money," he continued. "I heard them talking about it before. Something about $5 million. I don't think they thought I would wake up." Her hands covered her mouth. It couldn't be. Mark. Her son. Alicia, the mother of this beautiful child. But Noah was here, mud-covered, scratched, and he had clawed his way out of the grave. Helen wrapped her arms around him again. "You're safe now," she said. "You're with me. I promise I'll protect you." Noah's voice trembled. "I don't want to go back there. Ever." "You won't," Helen said. "I won't let anyone take you away." But her mind was spinning. How could she prove what had happened? Who would believe them? Everyone in town had attended Noah's funeral. Even the police chief, even the mayor. How could she walk into a station and say, "My dead grandson is alive and his parents tried to bury him alive for money"? But there was no other choice. She looked Noah in the eye. "We're going to the police," she said. He didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "What if they don't believe us?" Helen squeezed his hand. "Then we'll make them, because the truth is the truth, and you are living proof." Outside, the wind picked up. But inside Helen's heart, something steadier had begun to rise. Resolve. The next morning, Helen dressed Noah in warm clothes and drove straight to the Fairgrove Police Department. It was still early. The streets were quiet. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with fear, not fear for herself, but fear that no one would believe them. Fear of what would happen if they didn't. Noah sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window, clutching a book Helen had given him, a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. At the station, the officer at the front desk barely looked up from his clipboard. "Can I help you?" he asked, yawning. "Yes," Helen said, her voice firm. "This is my grandson, Noah Brooks. He was declared dead and buried 3 days ago, but as you can see, he's alive." The officer blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am. What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said, louder now, "that my son and daughter-in-law faked Noah's death. They drugged him, buried him alive, and he crawled out of his grave. This is attempted murder." The officer stared at her, then at Noah, then back at her. "I'm going to call the chief," he said, and quickly disappeared into the back. Noah gripped Helen's hand tightly. He was shaking again. After a few minutes, Chief Leonard Taylor appeared, a tall, barrel-chested man in his 60s, with a polished badge and practiced frown. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, putting on a look of concern. "You've been through a lot. I understand this grief can confuse a person." Helen stood up straighter. "Chief Taylor, look at him. That's Noah. You saw his casket, you signed the paperwork. But here he is, alive." Taylor glanced at Noah, and then looked away. "Ma'am, I hate to say this, but you may be projecting. This boy does resemble your grandson, but we cannot simply assume. Ask him, Helen snapped. Ask him anything. Taylor hesitated. Noah spoke up quietly. My name is Noah Brooks. My birthday is the 15th of April. My favorite food is Grammy Helen's apple pie. My teacher's name was Mrs. Keating. I was reading Holes by Louis Sachar before it happened. Taylor's jaw tightened. I think you should go home, Mrs. Brooks, he said coldly. You need rest, maybe some professional support. And what about him? She asked, voice rising. You're telling me to take a buried child back home and pretend this never happened? If you continue to disturb public peace, I may have to detain you, he said. Noah started crying. Helen pulled him close and walked out. Her knees were weak. Her heart was racing. But she kept walking. If the local police wouldn't help, she would find someone who would. Because when a child claws his way out of a grave, the world ought to listen. And she wasn't done fighting. That same afternoon, Helen drove straight to Fairgrove General Hospital. She didn't stop to call ahead. She didn't have time for polite scheduling. She marched to the front desk and asked for Dr. Susan Leung, the hospital's senior medical examiner. They had never met, but Helen remembered the name from the documents handed out at the funeral. Something had bothered her about them, even then. Dr. Leung emerged from the back office looking professional but tired. When she saw Helen, her expression softened. Mrs. Brooks, she said gently, I'm so sorry about your loss. Noah was such a sweet. Helen cut her off. He's alive. Susan blinked. Excuse me? Helen stepped aside. Noah stood there, looking up with wide, nervous eyes. Dr. Leung's face changed instantly. She stepped closer and crouched down. Noah? She whispered. It's me, he said. They buried me, but I got out. Susan stood up slowly and motioned them into her office. She closed the door and locked it. Then she turned and said, You need to tell me everything. Helen explained. The sedatives, the broken casket, the police chief who shut them down, and the horrifying confession from Noah about his own parents. When she finished, Susan sat in stunned silence. I knew something was off, she finally said. The death certificate was signed by a physician who doesn't exist. I flagged it, but Chief Taylor personally told me to let it go, said the family didn't want an autopsy, that they were grieving. Did you believe him? Helen asked. I didn't want to, Susan replied. But I also didn't have the power to push back. Not alone. She turned to Noah and gently examined him. His fingers still held soil under the nails. His skin had faint bruises. There were no head injuries, nothing matching what the report claimed. This matches everything he said, Susan murmured. The signs are consistent with shallow burial and recent trauma. Will you help us? Helen asked. Susan nodded. I will. And I know who else we need to call. Within the hour, Susan contacted the state police and the FBI. Insurance fraud is a federal crime, she told Helen. And now that we have Noah, we have more than suspicion. Helen exhaled for the first time in days. They weren't alone anymore. Justice had just opened the door. By the next morning, things were moving fast. State investigator James Ryder and FBI agent Angela Thomas arrived at Fairgrove General Hospital. They listened carefully as Noah recounted everything: how he was drugged, the strange-tasting drink, waking up underground, breaking through a cracked wooden lid, and clawing through the soil until he saw moonlight. Angela took notes, but her eyes never left Noah's face. You're very brave, she told him, and I believe every word. Noah gave a shy nod and held tightly to Helen's hand. Ryder and Angela got to work immediately. The first step was to exhume the grave. When they dug it up, what they found made everyone on site go silent. The casket was empty. The lid had been broken from the inside. Small handprints were embedded in the dirt above it, pressed into the underside of the shallow grave. Ryder looked at the grave team. This casket is barely 3 feet deep. That's not legal burial depth. Next, they investigated the funeral home. The director, a man named Gordon Ellis, cracked under pressure. I didn't know the boy was alive, he confessed. They said it was a closed casket burial. They paid me $50,000 in cash. I thought it was weird, but Chief Taylor signed off on everything. Angela's jaw tightened. You falsified a death to aid in insurance fraud and attempted murder. Ellis went pale. Meanwhile, toxicology tests on Noah's blood confirmed the presence of a strong sedative enough to knock out a child for hours, though not quite enough to kill. Angela explained. Most children wouldn't have survived it, but Noah did, likely due to adrenaline and sheer will. The agents then turned to the insurance companies. Mark Brooks had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Noah over the past year quietly and without Helen's knowledge. The total payout, $5 million. The plan had been chillingly calculated. Helen listened in disbelief as Ryder laid it out. Mark's business was drowning in gambling debt. Stock failures. He saw the insurance payout as his only way out. He never expected Noah to wake up, and he never expected him to escape. Both Mark and Alicia were arrested in their home that evening. Alicia screamed about mistakes. Mark tried to claim it was all Ellis's fault. But the evidence was overwhelming. Digital trails, wire transfers, signed policies, and above all Noah. Chief Taylor was arrested the next morning. He'd accepted $100,000 to suppress any questions about the burial and death records. By the end of the week, the mayor of Fairgrove resigned in the wake of suspicion. Several city clerks and police officers were investigated for related misconduct. What began as a child's miraculous escape had now grown into the largest corruption scandal the town had ever seen. And the boy who was supposed to be buried was now exposing every rotten root beneath the surface. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. News of Noah's survival had made headlines across the country. Buried alive, 8-year-old escapes death to expose family insurance scam, ran on every major outlet. Reporters lined the courthouse steps. Protesters gathered with signs that read "Justice for Noah." Helen sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She watched as Mark and Alicia entered in handcuffs, their faces pale, lips pressed in cold defiance. They didn't look at her. Not once. Noah testified on the third day. He stood, small and solemn in his pressed shirt, and told the court exactly what had happened. His voice trembled at times, but he never faltered. He told them what he remembered drinking. How he woke up in the dark. How he clawed his way out of the dirt because he didn't want to die without saying goodbye to his Grammy. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge wiped his eyes. Mark was found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and child abuse. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Alicia received 20 years for her role as an accomplice. Funeral director Gordon Ellis was sentenced to 10 years for fraud and reckless endangerment. Chief Taylor, once the symbol of safety in Fairgrove, was handed a 15-year sentence for obstruction of justice and bribery. Helen hugged Noah tightly outside the courthouse. "You did it," she whispered. "You told the truth, and the world believed you." Noah looked up at her with those same wide eyes he'd always had. "Can we go home now, Grammy?" "Yes, sweetheart," she said. "We can finally go home." And this time, no one would take that from them. 6 months later, Helen and Noah left Fairgrove for good. They moved to a quiet town called Silver Lake in Vermont, nestled near a gentle lake and surrounded by pine trees. Their new home was a modest cottage with a blue roof and a small garden in the back. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, and more importantly, it held no ghosts from the past. Helen had officially become Noah's legal guardian. The court had terminated all parental rights from Mark and Alicia. No visitation, no contact. Noah had been clear he never wanted to see them again. At Silver Lake Elementary, Noah started 4th grade under a new name for privacy. His teachers were kind, and his classmates didn't know anything about his past. He quickly became friends with a girl named Lily, who loved books and bugs as much as he did. In the beginning, the nights were hard. Noah would sometimes wake up crying, dreaming of dirt and darkness. Helen would sit beside him, stroking his hair until he fell back asleep. She also found a child therapist nearby, someone warm and steady, who helped Noah talk about what he had endured. Each week, his smile returned just a little more. They established new rituals: Saturday pancakes, reading by the fireplace, evening walks by the lake, where they watched the water ripple under the pink sky. One afternoon, while helping Helen knead dough in the kitchen, Noah said, "You know what I wrote for my school essay?" "What's that?" Helen asked. The topic was, "My hero. I wrote about you." Helen turned to him, startled. He continued, "I said my hero was Grammy Helen, because she believed me when nobody else did, and because she saved my life." Tears came to her eyes. All this time, she had wondered if she had done enough, if she had been strong enough. But hearing Noah's words, she knew that even in the darkest chapter of their lives, love had been the light. Noah wasn't just healing, he was thriving. And she wasn't just surviving, she was finally at peace. A year after the night Noah came back from the dead, Helen and Noah sat on a wooden bench by the lake. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow across the water. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth. It was peaceful, still. They didn't say much at first. Then Noah leaned his head against her shoulder. "I'm really glad I made it out," he said softly. "If I hadn't, I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have you." Helen wrapped her arm around him. "You were meant to survive," she whispered. "You fought your way back. That kind of courage, that's something no one can teach." Noah looked up at her. "Do you think we're still a real family?" Helen smiled. "I do. Because a real family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who protects you when it matters most." Noah nodded, thoughtful. "Then I think we're the realest family there is." They sat there until the sky turned violet and the first stars appeared. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt safe. The town of Fairgrove had since gone through sweeping changes. New leadership. New oversight over local police. Reforms in how child protection cases were handled. And across the country, Noah's story had sparked important conversations about trust, justice, and how easy it is to hide behind power. People wrote letters. Some sent drawings. Others sent donations to support Noah's recovery and education. But for Helen, the greatest gift was this momentone year later, sitting beside her grandson, hearing his voice, seeing his smile. She often thought back to something the therapist had said early on. "You can't erase trauma," he had told her, "but you can build something new on top of it. Stronger, safer, kinder." That's what they were doing now, day by day. Healing didn't come in a wave, it came like a slow tide, but it came. And to anyone watching, Helen would simply say this: not everyone who shares your blood deserves your trust. Sometimes, the people who love you most are the ones who fight for you when no one else will. If this story moved you, share it. Because someone out there might be waiting to feel seen, to feel believed, to feel safe again. And that can change everything.